Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining Cluey for our first webinar series. I hope you're all well this morning. My name is Dr. Selina Samuels, and I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Cluey Learning. Now, I've been an educator in one form or another for over 30 years, which is something a bit alarming to admit. I've worked as a university lecturer. I've worked as a classroom English teacher, as a head of English, the variety of administrative roles in schools in New South Wales, and I've also worked for an international network of schools setting up a teaching and learning methodology, interesting, using remote technology, which is coming into its own. And I've also worked in Hong Kong to establish a primary school and worked in the early years environment in that region. So I've had a lot of experience in education from early years right up to the tertiary sector. And I'm very delighted to be able to give you some advice and some insight into the whole NAPLAN question, particularly as it pertains to our students. So first off, why have we called this webinar NAPLAN and Nerves? And it's not just because it's alliterative, but that is quite satisfying for me as an English teacher. At Cluey, we like to put students at the centre of their learning journey. And that means asking them how they're going and what they're thinking about NAPLAN as we lead up to the tests in May. Now, our latest research has shown that students are unnerved by NAPLAN. In fact, close to 1/3 of the students that we surveyed admitted that it was the most stressful school experience that they'd encountered. However, when we surveyed parents, more than 70% of them said that they were not really all that concerned or even fussed about NAPLAN. So what we're finding is that on one hand, we've got students who are nervous about NAPLAN, who are concerned about it in some way or other, but parents who are not. So through this webinar, we want to address the topic of NAPLAN and nerves and give parents some strategies to work through this with your child and to build confidence, resilience as they face the tests. So today, what I'll be covering is what NAPLAN is and what its purpose is, how you can help your child overcome the nervousness they may feel about NAPLAN and build their confidence. And this will also translate to strategies you can use in other sorts of situations where your child is feeling nervous, how and when extra learning support might be beneficial. And finally, feel free to send questions through. You will see there's one question, how long the session will be. I'll try to keep it to 10 minutes. Do send through your questions and I will address them either directly through the webinar at the end if we have time, or I'll make sure that a learning advisor contacts you to answer your questions. So I'll get started. Firstly, what is NAPLAN and what is its purpose? Well, 2/3 of the parents that we spoke to said that they didn't know what NAPLAN stood for, what the acronym stood for, and I don't think that's that surprising. NAPLAN stands for National Assessment Program, Literacy and Numeracy. And it's a national It's a national benchmarking test or set of tests for students in years 3, 5, 7 and 9. It's designed to test skills in literacy and numeracy that the education profession and education departments across the country believe are important foundational skills for future education and for professional success. And the idea of it as a benchmarking test is it will give insight to the federal education department and to all state departments as to where generally students are sitting across the country. So it gives insight at average levels of proficiency, but it also provides schools and parents with an understanding of where an individual child sits compared to the average of the cohort across the country. It also has longitudinal benefits because it tells us how a cohort is progressing from where they did in year 3 to year 5 to year 7 to year 9. So it's a valuable way of testing across the country. It's the only national benchmarking assessment we have until students sit for their ATAR in year 12. And of course, not all students do that. It does give teachers insight into ways that they can support individual students in their care, and it gives parents that insight as well. Now, it's a highly debated topic, it's very controversial, and there are a number of reasons for this, and I'll just give you some idea of why that is. For a start, it's controversial because it's been used, the results have been used to, in some ways, create league tables of schools, so that the results are published school by school on the My School website, and this has led to a kind of league table situation, which a lot of schools have objected to. A lot of people have said it's not very valuable. It is controversial because it creates nerves, and this is something that we're, of course, talking about today. Controversial as well because of the time gap between when the test is administered in May and when the results are released, often much later in the year. And schools have said it makes it very difficult for classroom teachers to apply what they've learned from that test for the current year when it's proximate. And look, I think there's also been controversy around what it means for school funding. I'm agnostic about that. I don't really want to get into that debate. It's not really my place to do that. We know that NAPLAN is a reality, and I would say that a lot of the strategies that I'm going to talk about with you this morning are equally applicable to other test situations at school and assessments where children feel nervous. So it's not just about NAPLAN, but NAPLAN can be a really useful opportunity to find strategies to work with for your children. Okay, so let's talk about minimizing anxiety specifically. So our research overwhelmingly shows that students are unnerved by NAPLAN. Despite this, and I think this is very interesting, 1 in 3 keep their test nerves to themselves, and less than 10% confide that they're nervous to their teacher. At the same time, 70% of the students that we surveyed are talking to their friends in the playground about it. And this may be amping up their anxiety, but they're not talking to their parents. And yet, and 50% of parents, over 50% of the parents we spoke to said they're not mentioning NAPLAN to their children because they don't want to increase anxiety. So there is a bit of a discrepancy here. The children are anxious, they're talking to their colleagues. Parents think that talking about NAPLAN themselves to their children will increase anxiety, but my argument is that actually it will go a long way to dispelling the anxiety and providing strategies. So what I would recommend to parents is that they gauge whether or not their children are in fact anxious. The best way to do that is not to say we need to have an important conversation and sit down and fix them across the table with a steely look. And I would say that no, it's very rarely successful to start a conversation with anything that suggests it's significant or worrying. The best way to have this sort of conversation is shoulder to shoulder when you're doing something else. So I suggest that perhaps when you're driving them to sport or doing something that you do regularly as a family, it's a good opportunity to just say, so I know NAPLAN's coming up. How are you feeling about it? They're much more likely to be honest with you if they don't feel that you're really hanging on every word they say. I think as well, if they are anxious, and I'm going to talk a bit about what that means, I would definitely talk to them about things that make you nervous. So this is a great opportunity if your child admits that they're a little bit nervous about NAPLAN to talk about things that make you feel nervous in your normal life, the way you felt as a child, but also the way you feel now as an adult, and the strategies that you use to dispel or manage that anxiety. My feeling is, and I know that this is a feeling of many psychologists in this area, that while children are surrounded by the protection of their family and their teachers, this is a great opportunity to teach them strategies for resilience, rather than taking away the cause of the anxiety, which will not give them the sorts of strategies that they're going to need as adults. Now, I would also suggest you might want to find out whether the school itself is preparing your children for NAPLAN. 70% of the students we surveyed said that they felt that preparation was really helpful, and yet they said that over 20% said that they didn't think the school was actually providing any structured assistance. So it's a good idea to understand where the school sits with regard to NAPLAN and to therefore create any strategies around what they're already doing at school. Now, I must say, the proviso here is there is a difference between nervousness and something that is beginning to look a little bit like a case of clinical anxiety. If you feel your child is really tipping into that zone, your first port of call must be your GP. You must treat that seriously. I think that's probably a very small percentage of children, but it's not insignificant. So please make a distinction between real, true anxiety and normal and manageable nerves, because that's really what I'm dealing with here. One of the important things is that if your child is nervous, has strategies, does NAPLAN, it will probably help them to understand that the nerves are a bigger problem than the tests themselves, and that will help them build resilience for future challenges. I use this example often when I was young. The first time I sat a standardized test, my father gave me a very useful piece of advice. He said the day of the test will always arrive and it will always pass. And I've used that in many situations since then that are way more nerve-wracking than NAPLAN. It's been very helpful to me, and it may be that you need to give your child something like that to hang on to, that they will use well into adulthood to build their resilience and their confidence. So, having established what the school is doing and what the level of nerves your child may be feeling, it's interesting for you now to consider what could be useful for your child. One of the things about the NAPLAN tests that's important for parents to understand is that the structure of the questions and the structure of the tests themselves is quite unique. It's not necessarily anything the children will have encountered already in their schooling. Certainly, particularly for the younger students in Year 3 and even in Year 5, they're not used to working to time, and the very fact that it's time-limited tests may be making them anxious. We do know that familiarity with the structure of the test and the nature of the questions will go a long way to dispelling nerves and making children feel much more confident as they go into those tests. And after all, the tests are assessing skills in numeracy and literacy that we as a nation feel are valuable. So if preparation for NAPLAN is helping them build those skills and acquire those skills, it will inevitably be more beneficial than not to have it. One thing I would say though, just drilling children in those skills, just getting a book perhaps and going through the question types over and over again, may actually not be all that helpful. The important thing is not just to familiarize students with the format of the test and the nature of the questions and to give them those skills preparation. It's also the targeted support and feedback so that they can understand the areas that they should be focusing on and the strategies that they can use in the test to help them focus on the question and be effective and efficient and feel confident. So in thinking about additional support, I suggest you think about both familiarity with the actual format of the test and the format of the questions. Many of the numeracy questions, for example, are problem-based and word-based, which may be unfamiliar to a lot of students and may be something that they find quite difficult, even though they may be quite good at maths. So familiarity with the test and the format, and also confidence with the skills themselves, the numeracy and literacy skills. And by literacy skills, I'm talking about 3 strands. It's reading comprehension, so reading and answering questions. It's language conventions, which is grammar, spelling and punctuation, and it's writing. So all those components are going to be assessed. If you feel your child needs some extra learning support, there's a pop-up window you should see on your screen with a link to our website where you can learn more about Cluey Learning and our services, both for NAPLAN and also more general support in other areas. So now I'll move on to question time. Please feel free to send your questions through in the chat function. I can see them and I will try and get to them. But we had a couple of kind of very keen people who sent a few questions in beforehand. So I'll start with them and please feel free to ask questions as I go. First of all, Caroline in Sydney. Her question is, my daughter is doing her first set of NAPLAN exams this year. What are some things I should say to her the morning of the exam while I'm driving her to school to make her feel at ease? It's a very good question, and it doesn't just refer, of course, to NAPLAN. It refers to anything that children might be feeling nervous about that are happening at school today. I would suggest to them, first of all, the important thing is to focus on process and not to talk about outcomes. So process and establishing good strategies for tackling the test is much more important than worrying about the outcome of it. So I would say, I would talk to her about how she should try her best for every question and then move on and not agonize about each question, to use a pencil to underline important words in a question. This is particularly applicable to the numeracy problem-based questions, which might be a little bit unfamiliar because we don't tend to encounter so many words in maths. It's also very important that you tell them that in the end, this is just about how to get better. So it's that growth mindset approach. This will give us some information that will help you to get better and better, not so much about the fact that it may give you information that indicates that you've got problems. In the end, it is, as I said, it's a snapshot, and it's not really high stakes for kids, not like the ATAR, which is much higher stakes. Got another question here from Rashid in Melbourne. My 13-year-old son is particularly nervous about the numeracy component. What can I do to help him prepare? It's interesting, the numeracy test, and there's a reason why people are saying numeracy and not maths. The numeracy test is testing ability to work with number, and it is very problem-based and word-based. So it's important to read the questions very carefully, to read every bit of the question, not to jump through to the numbers, and to make sure that you're underlying the important parts of the question. And this is where practice and familiarity with the format of those questions can be really, really helpful. There's a question here from Chris. My kid is taking the online version of NAPLAN Year 5 for the first time. I'm not sure how to help him get familiar with the format. Any ideas? Well, our platform is all online, so we do inherently prepare students for doing that course online. And I think there are other resources that are available there. I would certainly ask the school, because if they know that the children are going to be doing NAPLAN online, they should have some strategies around how to prepare them. But certainly online providers like Cluey will give them that support, but the school may also have other things in place. I don't think it's unreasonable for you to ask the school. We have another question here from Radana. My child gets nervous when he is timed. He's in Year 3. Could you please share some ideas that I could use at home to help him feel less anxious? Very good question. I think timing is something that Year 3s in particular, because it's unfamiliar, feel a bit nervous about. What I suggest is that you start timing, not for punishment's sake. It's really important that it's not punitive. It's just to help them understand how long things will take. Some homework tasks. And the thing to do is perhaps to ask the school how long they think certain tasks are going to take, and then put a timer on and let them see the difference between how long it should take, how long it did take. But the important thing is the debrief afterwards, is to talk about why do you think it took you longer, or why do you think it didn't take you as long? Because the danger is not necessarily that they will take too long to complete the task. The danger is that they'll rush it. And it's important to teach them to use the full time allotted and to use extra time to go back and check what they've done. So these are very good strategies to put in place early, just so that they start to draw a connection between how long things take and how long they approach, the time it takes them to approach each task. It will be very valuable for their future life, I have to tell them. Time management skills are really valuable to teach children. I'm just going to check how long we've got. We seem to be okay. Please feel free to send through any other questions that you have. Meanwhile, there's one last question that was sent through earlier. This is Lynn from Adelaide. Why do some schools prepare students for NAPLAN and others don't seem to bother? Again, this is an interesting thing. We notice it's a standardised test without standardised approach. Not all schools feel the need to prepare students for NAPLAN, and that's their choice, and I wouldn't speak to that decision. It's important to ask the school what their expectations are, and they may be doing some preparation that is not evident to the children. I still think actually having a bit of an ability for students to actually look at something which is a mock version or a past version of NAPLAN goes a long way to easing their anxiety. Thank you all very much for taking part in this. If you have any questions, we have one last question I'll deal with. Can Cluey include NAPLAN related questions for those kids who are already doing fundamental? Yes, and we will in fact do that for all students who would like to do that. We will simply include NAPLAN preparation into their ordinary program, just so that everyone is prepared and comfortable and confident. And after all, it's about confidence, it's about resilience, and it's about giving kids the sense that they are in control of their own learning journey. Thank you all very much for participating. We will probably be doing more webinars on other topics going forward. Please feel free to send us through any feedback about how this worked for you, because that's all very valuable for us as we plan ahead. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.